There is no denying just how influential Extreme Championship Wrestling has been to the entire pro wrestling landscape, though it sometimes gets pigeonholed as being the hardcore company where everybody mindlessly falls through tables. ECW's menu was much more wide-ranging. Technical and high-flying classics, adult-themed angles, authentic characters and motivations, and yes, chaotic skin-ripping brawls were all part of the ECW tableau. It was a promotion where a wrestler could discover the best version of themselves. And that's what this list is going to recognize. Talents who entered into the world's most famous bingo hall in South Philly as one thing and emerged as a wrestler with greater potential. Some of them were WWE and WCW cast-offs that workshopped themselves into somebody the big two would one day want back, and others were indie lifters that eventually found their ideal voice after years of toiling away. Whatever the case may be, it was in ECW's gritty, grimy halls that the following stars discovered the best, perhaps most extreme version of themselves. I'm Tom Campbell from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 best ECW reinventions. Join us. Number 10, just incredible. You have to feel a bit for Credible. For over 2 years of his professional life, he had to waltz around wearing a jockstrap over his face and pretend he was happy about it. Suddenly, Aldo Montoya was no Inigo Montoya when it came to striking fear into the hearts of evildoers. Former WWF enhancement talent PJ Walker got the garish makeover in 1994, and while he was a capable, reliable wrestler, the get-up put a very low ceiling over his head. The only wars the Portuguese man-o-war was fighting were in the undercard. After escaping the Federation in 1997, and now bald-headed Walker eventually migrated to ECW, where he updated his look with baggy jean shorts and a punkish goatee, now calling himself Justin Credible. As far as gimmick changes go, oh wait, I get it now, Justin Credible, because he's just incredible. That's very clever. As far as gimmick changes go, there was nothing really radical about Justin Credible. He more or less played on stereotypical bad boy tropes, while now picking up wins over ECW heroes. But compared to Montoya, Credible had much more room to grow. He felt much more natural as an arrogant tool than a respected no one, and that was right at home in the lawless ECW. Plus, his finisher was a corkscrew tombstone, which was cooler than Montoya's finish did Aldo Montoya even have a finisher? Number 9, Al Snow. What does everybody want? Head. What does Al Snow want? A time to shine, that's all. Snow began wrestling all the way back in 1982, and it took more than a decade before he got a good look from a major organization. At one time, Snow was an indie darling, holding up his end of tape trader gold with the likes of Sabu and Chris Benoit, while starring in the dying days of Smoky Mountain Wrestling in a team with the future Kane. But in WWF land, the best they could give Snow were roles as a Mortal Kombat washout and a deluded teeny bopper. Snow ended up in ECW in 1997 as part of the mid-card, still donning his new Rockers attire. Soon after, Snow stumbled onto a new professional identity when he happened upon a prop mannequin head. Feigning like he'd lost his mind after years of WWF mismanagement, Snow began soliciting advice from the head, arguing with the head, and so forth. Fans caught on to the silliness of this dynamic, and soon the ECW crowds heralded Snow's entrance with their own styrofoam heads, creating a sort of rave effect when accompanied by Snow's Prodigy theme music. Snow eventually brought the head act to the WWF and became the patron saint of the hardcore title scene's unfettered zaniness. Number 8. Tommy Dreamer. Known for over a quarter century as the innovator of violence, that handle didn't always come to identify Dreamer. In fact, pre-1994, ECW's most loyal talent seemed to be the exact opposite. With a clean-cut babyface and jersey pompadour that made him look like he was headed down to the Roxy after work on a Friday, ECW crowds weren't so keen on young Tommy at the time. After all, ECW was a haven for blue-collar, lunch bucket fight fighters that fought tooth and nail, and this guy, who looked like Ben Affleck in Gigli, didn't really fit in. That's what made Dreamer's transformation so startling. By the end of ECW's existence, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone from that company more respected by its fan base. Anyone that perceived Dreamer to be a plucky, pretty boy changed their mind once he allowed the Sandman to cane him into oblivion in 1994, standing up defiantly after 10 positively brutal lashes. In the ensuing years, Dreamer took further life-altering risks, all in the name of proving his toughness. Dreamer became an auteur whose medium was self-sacrifice, synonymous with ECW ideals. When he bled, the company bled. The innovator of violence wasn't a concept dreamt up in a boardroom. Dreamer destroyed himself to earn that handle. Number 7. Cyrus. Perhaps the name doesn't immediately ring a bell, but if you're an AEW viewer, you will know this man well. Cyrus would be Don Callis, the grinning leech that clings to Kenny Omega's success and the bottom line like a barnacle in 80s Coke dealer sunglasses. Callis's unrepentant sliminess, character projection, and spoken eloquence make him one of modern wrestling's most effective heel managers, putting him on the same plane as former boss Paul Heyman. Given how much he shines as a mouthpiece for Omega and the entire Super Elite, it's almost inarguable that Callis is enjoying his best run in the business today in his late 50s. But Callis didn't just start playing this role in AEW. You have to go back 2 decades when he showed up in ECW as Cyrus, or Cyrus the Virus, as he was dubbed. Previously, Callis worked for the WWF as a manager / occasional wrestler known as the Jackal, but he didn't really get to show his best stuff there. After being let go, Callis became Cyrus, a more demonstrative slime ball that served as both heel color commentator alongside Joey Styles and as network rep for the very TNN cable channel that ECW was constantly at odds with. Callis perfected the repulsive businessman you want to strangle role in ECW, and today AEW dips its cup in that same beautiful font. Number 6. Cactus Jack. When one thinks of Mick Foley's time in ECW, they think of quintessential Cactus. The brawls, the blood, the scarring, and the time he was involved in a panic incident involving an open flame. Also worth mentioning are the promos, and really this is where Mick Foley shined brightest on the ECW stage. While you can't really say that the ECW version of Cactus Jack was all that radically different from prior versions of himself, save for the period where he ironically denounced hardcore wrestling, the forum gave Foley a chance to demonstrate how much range he truly had. Before ECW, Cactus was the wild-eyed brawler that did crazy things and cut entertaining promos. In ECW, his promos were still entertaining, but not always in a laugh-out-loud way. Whether he was railing against the fan sign that read Kane Dewey, Mick's son, or imploring to Dreamer that trying to please ECW fans would be the death of him, Foley showed off a dramatic flair that indicated a deeper humanity than those familiar with Cactus Jack had previously known. The sentimentality behind Dude Love, the relatability to mankind, and the sageness of plain old Mick, they all owe themselves to Cactus Jack, poetically bearing his soul in many of his incredible ECW promos. Foley is a hardcore legend, but he had much more to offer than just bloodshed. Number 5. Shane Douglas. To look at Shane Douglas in the early 90s is to see the archetype of a white meat babyface. Full head of long blonde hair, blue eyes, lean build, and general non-threatening demeanor. Better days could certainly have been ahead, but there was a missing component, a yet-to-be-discovered element that could crystallize Douglas as a top guy. Obviously, he found that element in ECW, where he'd have his first real, sustained run as a heel. Quickly becoming ECW's champion, Douglas feuded with the likes of Terry Funk and Sabu over the title and found his voice, literally. Now dubbing himself the Franchise, Douglas became ECW's premier villain, mixing Nick Bockwinkel's stuffiness with the crudeness of a shock jock. Betraying Douglas's button-down exterior was this phlegmy growl that was only about 3 or 4 octaves above Norwegian death metal vocals. When Douglas cut his barbed promos, you saw what looked like a white meat babyface angrily spitting out obscenities in a brash baritone. Certainly, Douglas's days of forcing a smile while toting around a skateboard were well in the past. Other than those 6 months where he played WWF's resident schoolteacher, Douglas had spent the remainder of his career trading on the franchise ideals. And through those ideals, he is likely the greatest heel in the history of ECW. Number 4. Taz. You've heard of the 3 faces of Foley. How about the 3 faces of Taz? The current face would be the AEW commentator, whose unique turns of phrase leave both he and Excalibur belly laughing uncontrollably. As an announcer, Taz is both hilarious and knowledgeable, though it's hard to reconcile that Taz with the human suplex machine that cut the so-termed path of rage through ECW in the late 90s. A multi-time title holder who choked his victims into unconsciousness, Taz kicked off his greatest days as a wrestler by making a significant change in 1995. When Taz debuted in ECW in 1993, he did so in a role he'd played for years in northeastern indies, the Tazmaniac. Similar to many wild men of wrestling's past, the Tazmaniac painted his face, wore a frilly singlet, and attacked opponents with primal fury. There were still exotic-looking suplexes in his arsenal, but this other face of Taz was still front-paged by an unrestrained barbarism. In 1995, Taz shed the gimmicks, becoming simply that, Taz. The suplexes were complemented by mat and submission work that put Taz on the cutting edge of MMA-influenced wrestling in the United States. This was an evolutionary Taz, one that would probably be a star in today's industry. I mean, he still is a star, but the human suplex machine was very much tailor-made for wrestling in 2021. Number 3, the Sandman. Before belting out Judas in stereo became en vogue, ECW fans were shouting the lyrics to Enter Sandman by Metallica at the top of their lungs every single time the namesake wrestler strode through the crowd, beer and cane in hands. That's because the Sandman was an ECW institution, and crooning along with James Hetfield was its own rite of passage. For many ECW fans, the Sandman was their spirit animal. He drank, he smoked, and he liked to beat people up. He may not have been the most polished wrestler, that's an understatement, but ECW wouldn't have been the same without the Sandman. At least without that Sandman. You see, the Sandman name had long been part of his professional identity, but before 1994, he wasn't yet the cane-swinging, beer-swilling reprobate that bled before his matches even began. Instead, the sand in his name referred to actual sand, as this Sandman was a beach bum, complete with wetsuit, sunglasses, and a surfboard. Cowabunga! Rest assured, the Philly crowds weren't singing along to Surfing USA by the Beach Boys, no. In 1994, the Sandman underwent a necessary heel turn, trading the beach attire for ratty street clothes and taking up all the nasty habits, as well as the right theme song. When Sandman turned face, he kept the lowbrow sensibility and cemented himself as an ECW icon. It's how we best know him. Number 2, Raven. Morose and melancholy wrestlers always seem to influence a portion of the audience, and Raven was no different. The sort of fan inclined to cheer Raven was already wearing punk and alternative band t-shirts, tattered jeans, and leather jackets anyway. But Raven was more than just a man in an outfit. There was an authentic spellbinding quality to his words. Possessing the psychological clasp of Kevin Sullivan and Jake Roberts before him, and Bray Wyatt after him, Raven was the master of mind games, speaking in sullen riddles about pain, suffering, and destruction. A Gen X Wyatt, so to speak. That's what makes all of Scott Levy's prior incarnations so head-spinning when you view them in conjunction with Raven. Where to start? where to start. How about Johnny Polo in the WWF, the obnoxious rich kid manager? Or Scotty Flamingo in WCW, the Palm Beach surfer dweeb? Yes, Raven and Sandman both kind of sort of played surfers. Levy was so good at being outwardly antagonistic that Raven was such a stark departure from that norm. And yet, that is what he is best remembered as. Inspired by Patrick Swayze's character in Point Break, Levy mixed in Bowery floor psychobabble to create Raven, the unscrupulous and violent manipulator that made his mark in multiple companies. But it was ECW crowds that first heard the Raven quoth himself. And at number 1, Steve Austin. At the end of the summer of 1995, Austin was fired from WCW, where he had worked for over 4 years. That December, he wrestled his first match for the WWF. In between those phases of his life, Austin spent 3 months in Extreme Championship Wrestling, working for Paul Heyman, his one-time manager in WCW. Now, it wouldn't be fair to say that Austin completely reinvented himself in ECW, but it is indisputable that ECW was a forum in which Austin learned how to turn life's negatives into creative positives. Already a tremendous wrestler, already a tremendous promo in ECW, Austin discovered his inner Stone Cold. Austin's ECW run is really best defined by 2 skits. Steve-O-Mania, in which he mocked Hulk Hogan's tired old routine, and Monday NyQuil, where he parodied both Nitro and lead announcer and shot caller Eric Bischoff. Still very bitter about Bischoff firing him over the phone weeks earlier. Make no mistake, Stunning Steve had been a compelling speaker in years past, but giving him a machine to rage against only put more growl, more rattlesnake venom into Austin's rants. The WWF didn't get it at first when they made him the muted ringmaster, but once they stuck the mic in his hand as Stone Cold, that aggressive FU energy came spilling out, beginning Austin's unconstrained rise. Getting fired from WCW was the best thing to happen to Steve Austin. That, or learning how to channel the bitterness from that into his promos, thus giving him a vital piece of the Stone Cold structure, something that he mastered in ECW.